One broken-down car, one impossible choice. A single father, drowning in accusations he couldn't fight, exhausted from working double shifts just to keep his daughter out of foster care, driving home through a storm that matched the chaos in his life. Then he saw her, a stranger, standing in the pouring rain beside a luxury car, desperate and alone. He could have kept driving. He should have kept driving. He had every reason to look the other way. But he stopped. He didn't know that one act of kindness would become the most dangerous and miraculous decision of his life. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. The wipers scraped across the glass in their endless rhythm, and Damien's eyes burned from the double shift he'd just pulled. Loading trucks, scanning boxes, moving, always moving. Because if he stopped, if he let himself think too long about the trial date circled in red on their kitchen calendar, he'd fall apart. 3 weeks. He had 3 weeks before everything ended. Then he saw it. Hazard lights blinking weakly through the curtain of rain. A red luxury car pulled onto the shoulder of Maple Avenue, the kind of vehicle that cost more than he'd make in 5 years. A woman stood beside it, her silhouette barely visible, the other frantically jabbing at her phone. Damien's foot eased off the gas pedal. His car slowed.
"Keep driving," the voice in his head whispered. "You're exhausted. She probably has roadside assistance. Someone with a car like that has insurance, has money, has people who can help." But something about her posture, the way her shoulders shook, whether from cold or frustration he couldn't tell, made his chest tighten. His mother's voice cut through his thoughts, as clear as if she were sitting in the passenger seat. "Character isn't about what you do when things are good, Damien. It's what you do when everything's falling apart." His jaw clenched. Everything was already falling apart. Gregory Phillips. The name tasted like acid. 6 months ago, $47,000 had vanished from their small landscaping company's accounts. 6 months ago, Gregory had looked him in the eye and accused him of taking it. 6 months ago, Damien's entire world had collapsed. The worst part? Gregory had been convincing. The doctored financial records, the forged signatures, the fake email trail, all of it pointed to Damien. And Gregory had better lawyers, better connections, better everything. "The evidence looks bad," his court-appointed attorney had told him just last week, Mr. Flores' kind eyes full of sympathy that felt like pity. "I believe you're innocent, Damien, but proving it, that's going to be tough." If convicted, he'd get up to 5 years. 5 years of Amelia growing up without him. 5 years of her being shuffled through foster homes because her mother had walked out when she was 2, leaving nothing but a note that said she wasn't cut out for this life. The thought of 7-year-old Amelia with her missing front tooth and her habit of putting her shoes on the wrong feet, alone in the system. Damien's car rolled to a stop behind the red sedan.
The rain hit him like a wall the moment he stepped out, instantly soaking through his already damp cloth. He raised one hand as he approached, making sure she could see him clearly, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. The woman turned, and even through the rain, he could see her body tense. Fear. She was afraid of him. Of course she was. A strange man approaching on a deserted road at midnight. "Ma'am," he called out, staying several feet back, making sure both hands were visible. "You okay? Car trouble?" She hesitated, studying him. Water streamed down her face, her clothes completely soaked. Then, as if making a decision, she nodded. "It just died. Won't turn over at all." Her voice was steady despite the situation, controlled, professional, the kind of voice that was used to being heard, to commanding respect. "Mind if I'd take a look?" Damien asked. "I'm not a mechanic, but I've kept enough old cars running to maybe help." Another pause. Then, Please, I'd appreciate it. She popped the hood and Damien stepped forward. The rain pelted the back of his neck as he leaned over the engine, and for a moment he was grateful for the distraction. This problem he could maybe fix. This problem didn't involve lawyers and courtrooms and the terrified look in his daughter's eyes. His fingers traced along wires and connections, and within minutes he'd found it. Your battery terminal's loose. He called over the sound of the rain. Probably got jarred by a pothole. You got any tools? No, I don't think so. Damien jogged back to his sedan, water streaming down his face, and grabbed his toolkit from the trunk. As he worked, tightening the connection and cleaning the corrosion from the terminal with the edge of an old rag, he found himself talking, filling the silence the way he did when Amelia couldn't sleep. "This battery's on its last legs," he said, his fingers working despite the cold. "You should get a new one soon. There's a gas station about 2 miles up the road. They'll have 'em." He could feel her watching him. Even in the rain and darkness, he registered her face, the sharp intelligence in her eyes, the way she carried herself with quiet authority despite being stranded and soaked. She was the kind of woman who commanded rooms, he could tell, the kind who made decisions that mattered. The connection clicked into place and Damien straightened, wiping rain from his eyes. "Try it now." She slid into the driver's seat, turned the key, and the engine roared to life. The relief on her face was immediate, genuine, transforming her features. "How much do I owe you?" She was already reaching for her purse. Damien shook his head, backing toward his car. "Just glad I could help, ma'am." "Wait, at least tell me your name so I can thank you properly." He turned back, rain streaming down his face, and for a moment their eyes met fully. He saw gratitude there, and something else, a kind of respect, like she was seeing something in him that most people missed. "Damien," he said. Then, because he was too tired to be cautious, because the trial was 3 weeks away and nothing mattered anymore, "Damien Wells." "Thank you, Damien Wells," she said, her voice warm despite the cold. "You might just have saved my night." If only you knew, he thought, climbing back into his car. If only you knew you might just have been helped by a man the world thinks is a thief. He pulled away, watching her hazard lights disappear in his rearview mirror. He'd never asked her name. In 3 weeks, none of this would matter anyway. He was wrong about that. 3 weeks later, Damien sat in Hartford County Criminal Court, his cheap suit borrowed from Mr. Flores because he couldn't afford to buy one. His hands were clammy, his heart racing so fast he thought he might pass out. This was it. The moment that would decide whether he got to tuck Amelia in tonight or whether he'd spend the next 5 years watching her grow up through prison glass. Mr. Flores sat beside him, organizing papers with practiced efficiency, but Damien could see the worry in his attorney's eyes. They both knew how this looked. They both knew what happened to people like Damien when they went up against people like Gregory. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Kendall Ross," the bailiff announced. Damien stood on shaking legs, his eyes fixed on the floor. He couldn't bring himself to look up, couldn't bear to see the face of the person who held his entire future in their hands. But then something made him glance up. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fate. The judge entered, black robes flowing, her posture commanding and authoritative as she took her seat behind the bench, and Damien's breath caught in his throat. Wait. He knew that face. Those eyes. That way of carrying herself with quiet authority. His mind flashed back to the rainy night, the woman beside the red car, the gratitude in her eyes when he'd fixed her battery terminal. No, it couldn't be. But the more he stared, the more certain he became, and the more impossible it seemed. The woman he'd helped 3 weeks ago was now sitting behind that bench, holding a gavel that would determine his fate. His heart hammered in his chest. Was he imagining this? The lighting was different now, harsh fluorescent instead of darkness and rain. She was in formal robes instead of soaked clothes. Her hair was pulled back severely instead of wet and loose around her face. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe his desperate mind was seeing connections that didn't exist, looking for hope in impossible places. But those eyes, the shape of her face, the way she held herself. Damien's hands gripped the edge of the table. He wanted to say something, to ask, to confirm, but how could he? What would he even say? "Excuse me, Your Honor, did I fix your car 3 weeks ago?" He glanced at Mr. Flores, but his attorney was focused on his notes, completely unaware of the storm raging inside Damien's head. The judge, Judge Ross, the bailiff had said, was looking down at the case file, her expression neutral and professional. If she recognized him, she gave no sign of it, not a flicker of acknowledgement, not a hint of familiarity. Maybe it wasn't her? Maybe he was losing his mind. The proceedings began, and Damien tried to focus, tried to listen to the prosecutor's opening statements and Mr. Flores' responses, but his mind kept returning to that face behind the bench. It looked like her. It really looked like her. But how could it be? What was the odds? Throughout the hearing, Damien found himself stealing glances at Judge Ross, trying to be certain, trying to reconcile the desperate woman in the rain with this stern figure of authority. Every time he looked, he was more convinced, and every time he told himself he had to be wrong. Then something happened that made his heart stop. The prosecutor was presenting the photocopied financial documents, and Judge Ross leaned forward, her eyes sharp as she examined them. "Mr. Davis? These are photocopies. Where are the originals?" Damien's breath caught. It was her. It had to be her. But she never looked at him, never gave any sign that she knew who he was. Her face remained perfectly neutral, perfectly professional, as she questioned the prosecutor about the evidence. "I have concerns about these documents," she said firmly. "This court will not proceed based on photocopies of photocopies. Mr. Flores, I'm granting your motion for forensic examination. We'll reconvene when we have properly authenticated documents." The gavel came down with a sharp crack, and Damien flinched. As the courtroom began to clear, Damien remained seated, his mind reeling. Mr. Flores was talking beside him, explaining what had just happened, how unusual it was, how lucky they were. But Damien barely heard him. His eyes were on Judge Ross as she gathered her files and disappeared into her chambers. Was it her? Had the woman he'd helped in the rain just saved him right back? Or was his desperate mind playing tricks on him, creating hope where there was none? He wanted to believe. He wanted so badly to believe. But he couldn't be sure. And that uncertainty would haunt him for the next 2 weeks. Kendall Ross leaned against her chamber's door, her hands trembling as she pressed them flat against the wood. Her heart was racing, her mind spinning with the magnitude of what had just happened. Damien Wells, the man who'd stopped in the pouring rain to help her, the man who'd refused payment and smiled wearily and told him his name before disappearing into the night. She'd seen the recognition in his eyes when she'd entered the courtroom, watched him do a double-take, watched confusion and hope and uncertainty flash across his face. He suspected, but he wasn't sure, and she'd given him no confirmation, kept her face perfectly neutral. Because to acknowledge it, to show any sign that she knew him, would be grounds for immediate recusal. And if she recused herself, this case would go to Judge Patterson. Kendall pressed her fingers to her temples. She'd just bent every ethical rule in the book. She'd used her position to demand evidence examination that should have been done months ago. She'd fought for a defendant she had personal contact with. But what choice did she have? Let an innocent man go to prison because the system was too lazy to do its job properly? She'd seen the evidence, seen how flimsy it was, how circumstantial, how easily it could be torn apart with proper examination. But Judge Morrison had been too busy to care, had denied the forensic examination because it cost money and time. Damien Wells was being railroaded, and the only person who could stop it was someone who should have recused herself the moment she'd seen his name. Sometimes justice required impossible choices. She just hoped she was making the right one. 2 weeks felt like 2 years. Damien went through the motions, working at the warehouse, picking up Amelia from Mrs. Marin's, reading bedtime stories, pretending everything was fine. But every night he lay awake wondering, was it her? Had she recognized him? Was that why she demanded the forensic examination? Or was he imagining connections that didn't exist, seeing miracles where there was only coincidence? "Daddy, you're thinking too loud," Amelia mumbled one night, half asleep. "It's keeping me awake." "Sorry, baby girl. Go back to sleep." "Is it the court thing?" "Yeah." "Mrs. Marin says judges are fair, says they help good people." "I hope so, Emmy. I really hope so."
The forensic accountant's report arrived on the Tuesday. Mr. Flores called Damien at work, his voice shaking with emotion. "Damien, the report. It's everything we needed. Gregory fabricated everything. The digital records prove it. You're going to be okay." Damien's legs gave out. He sat down hard on a stack of boxes, phone pressed to his ear, tears streaming down his face. "We're going back to court tomorrow. Judge Ross wants to reconvene immediately." Judge Ross? Was it her? Maybe tomorrow he'd know for sure.
After careful examination of the evidence, Judge Ross said from the bench, her voice carrying absolute authority, "This court finds that the prosecution's case is built on fraudulent documents. The digital banking records conclusively demonstrate that Gregory Phillips, not Damien Wells, committed the embezzlement in question. Mr. Wells, all charges against you are hereby dismissed with prejudice." The courtroom erupted in noise, but Damien heard none of it. His hands were shaking, his vision blurring with tears he couldn't control. Free. He was free. "Furthermore," Judge Ross continued, her voice cutting through the chaos, "I'm referring this case to the district attorney with a strong recommendation that charges be filed immediately against Gregory Phillips for fraud, embezzlement, forgery, and obstruction of justice." The gavel came down with finality. Damien looked up at her then, really looked up at her, and their eyes met for just a fraction of a second. And in that moment, he knew. It was her. It had always been her. She'd known who he was from the moment his case crossed her desk, and she'd fought for him anyway. But before he could say anything, before he could even process what he wanted to say, she was standing, gathering her files, disappearing into her chambers with the same professional efficiency she'd shown throughout the trial. Mr. Flores was hugging him, talking about civil suits and compensation, but Damien barely heard him. His eyes were on that closed chamber's door. He wanted to thank her, needed to thank her, but how could he? How could he approach a judge who'd just saved his life and ask if she was the woman whose car he'd fixed in the rain? It seemed impossible. Inappropriate. So he left the courthouse that day with freedom in his hands and questions in his heart. But he knew. Deep down he knew. And somehow he had to find a way to tell her thank you.
6 weeks passed like a dream. Damien found a better job at a hardware store. Better pay, better hours, benefits that actually meant something. He was home for dinner every night. Emilia drew pictures of Daddy being free that covered their refrigerator in rainbows and misspelled words. Life was good, better than he'd ever imagined it could be, after everything that had happened. But something nagged at him. He'd never gotten to properly thank the judge, never gotten to confirm what he knew in his heart to be true, that she was the woman from the rain, that she'd recognized him, that she'd risked everything to save him. He was restocking shelves in aisle 7, automotive supplies, which felt appropriate given how this whole thing started, when a voice behind him said, "Excuse me, do you know where I might find battery terminals?" Damien turned, and there she was. Not in judge's robes this time, not behind a bench with a gavel in her hand, just a woman, in jeans and a casual sweater, her hair down, standing in the hardware store with a slight smile on her face. "It's you," he breathed, the box of windshield wipers slipping from his hands. "I knew it. In the courtroom, I thought, I wasn't sure, but I knew." Her smile widened, warmer now, more genuine. "You recognized me." "How could I not? Your face, your voice, but I kept thinking maybe I was imagining it. Maybe my mind was playing tricks because I was desperate." He took a step closer, his voice dropping. "You knew too. The whole time. You knew I was the guy who fixed your car. From the moment I saw your photo in the case file. The coffee mug I was holding hit the floor and shattered. But you couldn't say anything. If I'd acknowledged it, I would have had to recuse myself. Your case would have gone to Judge Patterson." Damien closed his eyes, understanding washing over him. "And Judge Patterson would have convicted me. Almost certainly. He has a 94% conviction rate and no patience for public defenders. So you risked everything. Damien's voice was barely a whisper. Your career? Your reputation? I could lose my position if anyone found out, Kendall said quietly. I broke about a dozen ethical guidelines, but I'd do it again. They stood in the middle of the hardware store, surrounded by mundane things, screws and paint cans and extension cords, and the moment felt sacred. Why? Damien asked. Why would you risk so much for someone you met once in the rain? Because that one meeting told me everything I needed to know about your character. A man who stops in the pouring rain to help a stranger using his own duct tape tools, refusing payment when he clearly needs it. That's not someone who steals from others. That's someone with integrity. And I couldn't watch an innocent man go to prison just because the system was too lazy to look at the real evidence. Damien felt tears sting his eyes. You saved my life. Saved my daughter from losing her father. You helped me first, said Kendall softly. You had every reason to keep driving that night. You were exhausted, worried, probably running through worst-case scenarios about your trial, but you stopped anyway. You showed me something I'd stopped believing existed. Real, uncomplicated human goodness. I never even learned your name that night. I know. I realized that later. You gave me yours, Damien Wells, but you never asked mine, and I never offered it. If I had, would things have been different? I don't know. Maybe. But maybe everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to.
There's something else, Kendall said, a smile playing at her lips. During your trial, you brought your daughter to court once. She had to wait in the hallway while we were in session. Damien nodded. Emilia, Mrs. Marin was sick that day, and I had no one else to watch her. She drew me a picture, gave it to the bailiff to give to me. Kendall's smile widened. A judge with a superhero cape. She told him I had a magic hammer that made bad people go away. Despite everything, the weight of the conversation, the emotion churning in his chest, Damien laughed. It burst out of him, genuine and surprised. She thinks your gavel is magic. She's been telling everyone at school about how the nice lady with the magic hammer saved her daddy. I'd love to see more of her drawings. Then, with visible courage, with vulnerability showing through her professional composure, maybe over coffee? If that's allowed now that the case is over? Damien felt his heart do something complicated in his chest, something that felt like hope and gratitude, and the beginning of something neither of them had expected. It's allowed, he said, his voice thick with emotion. In fact, I'd really like that. I'd really like that a lot. That Saturday, Damien brought Emilia to the cafe. He'd explained that Miss Kendall wanted to see her drawings, and his daughter had spent the entire morning organizing her artwork and changing her outfit 4 times. Is she the magic hammer lady? Emilia asked, bouncing on her toes. She is. Is she pretty? Very. Is she nice? The nicest. Then I'm wearing my princess dress, the yellow one, because yellow is happy and we're happy now, right, Daddy? Damien had knelt down, eye level with his daughter, his heart so full it ached. We're the happiest, baby girl. Now, watching Emilia spot Kendall across the cafe and practically vibrate with excitement, he felt something shift inside him. Something that felt like coming home. Daddy, Daddy, it's the magic hammer lady. Emilia squealed, dragging him forward with the kind of strength that only excited 7-year-olds possess. Kendall stood, and Damien watched her face transform as Emilia barreled toward her. All the professional composure melted away, replaced with genuine warmth and delight. Hi, I'm Emilia, but you can call me Emmy, because that's what Daddy calls me when I'm being good, and I'm being very good today.
The words tumbled out in one breathless rush as Amelia thrust a rolled-up piece of paper at Kendall. "See? That's you with your magic hammer, and that's the cape, because superheroes need capes, obviously."
"Obviously," Kendall agreed, unrolling the drawing with genuine care, her eyes softening as she studied the crayon artwork. "This is beautiful, Emmy." "I know," Amelia said, with zero modesty, already climbing into the chair across from Kendall. "I'm really good at art, and also at eating pancakes. Do they have pancakes here?" Damien finally caught up, slightly out of breath. "Emmy, slow down. You're like a tiny tornado." "Tornadoes are fast and powerful, Daddy. Thank you." Amelia beamed, completely missing that it wasn't exactly a compliment. Kendall was laughing, really laughing, and it was the most beautiful sound Damien had ever heard. In the courtroom, she'd been all authority and sharp edges, controlled and professional. Here, watching her interact with his whirlwind daughter, she was something else entirely. She was real. She was warm. She was someone he could see in their lives, not just as the judge who'd saved him, but as someone who belonged. Over hot chocolate for Amelia and coffee for the adults, the conversation flowed with surprising ease. Amelia entertained them with elaborate stories about her stuffed animals' adventures, complete with different voices and dramatic hand gestures that knocked over her hot chocolate twice. And then Mr. Fluffington, he's my rabbit, he said to Princess Sparklepaws, she's my cat, "We need to save the kingdom." But then they remembered they can't read maps, so they got lost at the grocery store instead. "That's quite a plot twist," Kendall said, genuinely charmed, dabbing at the spilled hot chocolate with napkins. "I know, I'm full of twists. Daddy says I should write movies." Amelia took another huge sip of her refilled hot chocolate, leaving a whipped cream mustache on her upper lip that made Kendall smile. "Are you going to be Daddy's girlfriend? Because Mrs. Marin says you're pretty, and Daddy needs a girlfriend because he's been mopey for too long." "Amelia!" Damien's face turned bright red, and he wished the floor would open up and swallow him.
"What? Mrs. Marin said it, not me." "But I agree, you are pretty, and you have a magic hammer. That's basically the best combination ever." Kendall tried not to laugh at Damien's mortification, her eyes dancing with amusement. "Well, your dad and I are going to be friends first, and we'll see what happens." "Okay, but just so you know, I'm really good at sharing Daddy. And I make excellent friendship bracelets, if you want one. I use all the best colors, not the boring ones." As Amelia launched into an enthusiastic explanation of her bracelet-making technique, Damien caught Kendall's eye across the table. She was smiling at him with something warm and knowing, and he realized this felt natural, easy, like maybe they'd been heading toward this moment since that rainy night when their worlds first collided. The universe had taken him to the edge of losing everything, had brought him face to face with his worst fear, and then had given him this, a second chance, a new beginning, and a woman who'd risked everything to believe in him. Sometimes kindness comes back to you in ways you never expect. The coffee dates became a regular thing, sometimes with Amelia, sometimes without, but always filled with laughter and easy conversation that surprised them both. They discovered they both loved old movies, that neither could cook without setting off smoke alarms, that they'd both lost parents young and carried the weight of responsibility for others. On their fourth outing, a trip to the zoo with Amelia, they stood watching the penguins waddle across their enclosure. Amelia had run ahead to the sea lions, her yellow jacket bright against the gray winter day. "Daddy, hold Miss Kendall's hand so she doesn't get lost," Amelia called back, already halfway to the next exhibit. I don't think," Damien started, embarrassed. "It's okay," Kendall said, softly, slipping her hand into his. Her fingers were warm despite the cold air. "For safety reasons." "Right. Safety," Damien agreed, his heart hammering in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Her hand fit perfectly in his, like it belonged there, like this was always meant to happen. By month 3, they'd started having occasional dinners alone, while Mrs. Marin watched Amelia. Real dates where they could talk about hopes and fears without interruption, though Amelia always demanded full reports afterward. "Did you hold hands? Did Daddy make his nervous laugh?
Did you talk about me? You should always talk about me. I'm the best topic. One evening, after a particularly lovely dinner where they'd talked for hours without noticing the time passing, Damien walked Kendall to her car. The red sedan had a new battery now, and sometimes Kendall joked that she should write a thank you note to the pothole that had jostled the old terminal loose. "Can I tell you something?" Kendall asked, leaning against her car. "Something I probably shouldn't say because it's too soon and might scare you away?" "You can tell me anything." "When I saw your name on that docket, when I realized who you were, I was terrified. Not because of the ethical implications, though those were very real, but because in that one interaction on Maple Avenue, you'd shown me something I'd stopped believing existed in this world." "What's that?" "Goodness. Real, uncomplicated human goodness. You had every reason to keep driving that night. You were exhausted, worried, facing trial in 3 weeks, but you stopped anyway. You used your own duct-taped tools, got soaked helping a stranger, and refused payment. And I thought, this is someone worth knowing. This is someone worth fighting for." Damien felt his eyes sting with unexpected emotion. "You risked everything for me." "I risked my career," Kendall corrected gently. "You would have risked your daughter. Those aren't equivalent scales. What I did was the minimum that justice demanded. What you did that night was pure character." He kissed her then, soft and careful and full of promise. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling. "Emmy's going to be insufferable when she finds out," Damien said. "She'll probably demand a full report. She'll want to know if there were fireworks." "And what will you tell her?" Damien pulled Kendall close again. "I'll tell her there were fireworks, the best kind." By month 6, Kendall had become a regular fixture in their lives. She learned that Amelia hated mushrooms, but would eat any vegetable if you called it power-up food. That Damien could fix almost anything with duct tape and determination. That their tiny apartment was filled with more love than many mansions. 1 year and 3 months after the trial that almost destroyed his life, Damien was planning to propose. He'd picked out a ring. Nothing fancy, because fancy wasn't their style, but something that sparkled the way Kendall's eyes did when she laughed. He'd planned an elaborate sunset proposal at the park where they'd had their 3rd date, the one where Amelia had insisted he hold Kendall's hand for safety. Mrs. Marin had agreed to watch Amelia while he took Kendall to the park. Everything was planned perfectly, except he'd made one crucial miscalculation. Amelia could not keep a secret to save her life. They were at the park, walking toward the spot where he'd planned to get down on one knee, when Amelia, who was supposed to be at Mrs. Marin's, suddenly appeared from behind a tree and shouted at the top of her lungs, "Are you going to ask her to marry us yet? The ring is burning a hole in your pocket, Daddy. That's what Mrs. Marin said." Kendall's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes going wide with shock and delight. Damien glared at his daughter, who was bouncing up and down with zero remorse. "Emmy, you were supposed to be at Mrs. Marin's. That was supposed to be a surprise." "Mrs. Marin and I decided I should be here for the important moment. And oops about the surprise, but surprises are hard to keep. They're like trying not to laugh when someone says poopy. You just can't." Several other people in the park had turned to look at them now, and Damien felt his entire face burning. But Kendall was laughing and crying at the same time, and when he looked at her, she nodded. So he got down on one knee right there, with his 8-year-old daughter bouncing excitedly beside him and strangers starting to gather around with their phones out. "Kendall Ross," he said, pulling the ring box from his pocket with shaking hands, "you saved my life in more ways than one. You saw me when I was invisible. You believed in me when the world didn't. You looked at my rusty toolkit and saw character instead of poverty. You looked at my chaos of a daughter." "I'm not chaos, I'm enthusiastic," Amelia interrupted indignantly. "My enthusiastic daughter," Damien corrected, fighting a smile. "And somehow you fell in love with both of us. You've made us a family. You've made us whole. You've shown us that sometimes the person you help in the darkness becomes the light that saves you.
Will you marry us? Say yes! Say yes! I already picked out my flower girl dress and it's yellow, Amelia added helpfully, jumping up and down.
Kendall was fully crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling so wide it looked like her face might split. Yes, yes, to both of you, all of you, forever and ever. Amelia launched herself at Kendall, nearly knocking her over with the force of her hug. I knew it! I told Daddy you'd say yes. Mrs. Marin owes me $5. You bet on this? Damien asked, incredulous, slipping the ring onto Kendall's finger. Well, yeah, I had insider information. I'm very smart about these things. I'm basically a professional matchmaker. The small crowd that had gathered applauded, and several people were wiping their own eyes. One elderly woman called out, "Best proposal I've ever seen." "Thank you, I helped plan it," Amelia yelled back, waving like she just won an Oscar. Damien pulled Kendall close, kissing her while Amelia made exaggerated gagging sounds, and then immediately said, "Okay, now that that's over, can we get ice cream? This is definitely an ice cream moment." The wedding was planned for the following spring. Amelia took her role as flower girl and wedding coordinator very seriously, creating elaborate lists and insisting on multiple dress rehearsals. "We need to practice, Daddy. What if I forget how to throw petals? What if I throw them too hard and they hit someone in the face? That would be bad for the photos." "I think you'll do great, baby girl." "I know I'll do great. I'm just being thorough. That's what professionals do." The wedding day arrived with perfect spring weather, the kind that makes everything feel possible and new. The garden venue was decorated simply, white chairs arranged in rows, soft flowers hanging from trees, sunlight filtering through leaves like nature's own spotlight. Mrs. Marin, who'd become like a grandmother to Amelia, wept openly throughout the ceremony. Mr. Flores, Damien's former public defender, served as best man, and in his toast he said, "I've seen a lot of justice in my career, but watching these two find each other, that's something beyond what any courtroom could deliver. That's the universe making things right." Janet, Kendall's clerk from the courthouse, served as maid of honor and spent half the ceremony crying happy tears into tissues. Amelia, now 8.5, the half is very important, people, stood as flower girl in her insisted upon yellow dress. She'd practiced her walk down the aisle at least 40 times, but when the moment came, she skipped instead of walking. "Skipping is more joyful," she explained later to anyone who would listen. "This is a joyful day. Everyone should skip more. It's scientifically proven to make you happier. I read it somewhere." During the ceremony, when the officiant asked if anyone objected to this union, Amelia stage whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "If anyone says anything, I'll fight them. I took a karate class. I know 3 moves." The guests erupted in laughter, and even the officiant had to pause to compose himself. When it came time for Amelia to present the rings, she carried the pillow like it held the crown jewels, walking with exaggerated care. Then she announced to the assembled guests, "Just so you all know, I set them up. I'm basically a professional matchmaker now. If anyone needs help finding love, see me after the ceremony. My rates are very reasonable. Mrs. Marin, you're next on my list." Mrs. Marin nearly spit out her champagne, and the guests dissolved into laughter again. The vows themselves were simple but profound. Damien promised to always stop for strangers in the rain, to keep fixing things with duct tape and hope, to be the father Emmy deserved, and the husband Kendall had never thought she'd find. Kendall promised to always fight for justice even when it was hard, to use her magic hammer wisely, to embrace the beautiful chaos that came with loving a tornado in an 8-year-old body, and to never take for granted the man who'd shown her what true character looked like. As they exchanged rings, Amelia whispered to Mrs. Marin, "This is the best thing I ever did. I'm really good at this matchmaking stuff." During the reception, Amelia took her self-appointed job as party coordinator very seriously. She taught Janet from the courthouse how to do the floss dance, critiqued the DJ's song choices, more Encanto, we need way more Encanto, and ensured everyone knew the full origin story of her parents' relationship. So,
Basically, Daddy fixed her car in the rain because he's nice. Then she used her magic hammer to save him from the bad guy because she's awesome. Then I drew a picture because I'm artistic. Then they fell in love because obviously they should. Then I told them to get married because I'm smart. And now we're a family. Any questions? One guest raised his hand. So you're saying you're responsible for all of this? Obviously. I mean, they helped a little bit, but mostly it was my excellent planning. I'm gifted. As Damien and Kendall shared their first dance, she whispered against his shoulder, "I broke so many ethical guidelines for you." He whispered back, "Was it worth it?" She looked over at Amelia, who was now attempting to teach the very serious Mr. Flores how to do the worm on the dance floor, with zero success but maximum enthusiasm. Then back at the man who'd stopped to help her on the worst night she'd had in years. "Every single violation," she said, and kissed him as their small gathering of loved ones applauded, and Amelia yelled, "Get a room! Just kidding, this is romantic. Keep going." Later, during what was supposed to be the father-daughter dance, but became a family dance because Kendall insisted on joining, Amelia looked up at both of them with unusual seriousness. "I'm really happy. Like the happiest I've ever been in my whole entire life." "Me too, baby girl," Damien said, his voice thick with emotion. "Me three," Kendall added, pulling them both closer. "Good, because now I have a mom who can teach me about the law, and a dad who can teach me about fixing cars, and I'll be basically unstoppable. I'm going to run the world someday." "That's what I'm afraid of," Damien laughed. "Also, can we get a dog now? Because families should have dogs. It's basically a rule. I checked." "We'll talk about it," both parents said in unison. "That's parent talk for maybe yes. I'm totally wearing you both down. I can feel it working."
Sometimes we think we know how our story will end. Damien had believed his would end in a courtroom with a gavel coming down to seal his fate and separate him from his daughter forever. He'd believed in a world where character didn't matter, where the system crushed people like him without mercy or second chances. But he'd been wrong about all of it. Gregory Phillips was serving 5 years for fraud and embezzlement. The real evidence, once properly examined, had been overwhelming. Justice had been served, even if it had taken an unconventional path to get there. Damien had spent months believing the system would destroy him, never knowing that the system, in the form of one remarkable woman with a conscience stronger than her fear, had been fighting for him all along. And Kendall, she'd spent years dispensing justice from behind a bench, making decisions that affected countless lives, believing that following the rules was always the same as doing right. But she'd learned that sometimes the greatest judgment you can make is choosing to follow your heart, even when it means bending rules that were written without room for mercy or human connection. As for Amelia, she gained a mother who taught her that being strong and being kind weren't mutually exclusive, who showed her that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is believe in someone when the world doesn't, who proved that magic hammers are real if you're willing to use them for good, and who never, ever underestimated the matchmaking skills of an 8-year-old with a plan and unlimited confidence. The three of them, a father who believed in helping strangers, a judge who believed in justice over blind rule following, and a little girl who believed in magic hammers, became the family none of them had known they were searching for. And that makes all the difference in the world. If this story reminded you that kindness always comes back to you in unexpected ways, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. What's the kindest thing a stranger ever did for you? Tell us in the comments below. Your story might be the next one we tell, because we all have the power to stop in the rain. We all have magic hammers in our hands if we're brave enough to use them for good.